Now I face out, I hold out, I reach out to the truth. All my life seeking the seas of the whole moment till now break away.
Hi, and welcome to my channel. So, before we start, I have a question for you. Do you believe in fiction? I do. And I draw a very firm line between fiction and reality. And that's why, for those who mayhaps have trouble with that, I've created this little tool I've come up with called the spectrum of trash. So, as you can see, there's a range for reality, and then there's a range for fantasy. And basically, what this graphic is supposed to be, implying is that the range that I would accept behaviors from a character is much wider in fantasy than in reality. Like, it makes sense, I hope, to you that you wouldn't accept someone who's committed murder as a, boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, partner, if you will. But in fantasy, you might think that's romantic if they've murdered someone for you. And that can say a lot about you, but it's fantasy, so like, who cares? And I did put healthy communication outside of reality, and I realized afterwards that's actually kind of funny, but so I'm just leaving it like that. So just understand that in this video and any future video, I'll bring it up if you forget, I excuse a lot more things in fantasy than I would in reality. So I don't want to hear about how I'm normalizing abuse or anything like that. No, I'm not. This is fantasy I'm talking about. Fiction. All right? Also, as a disclaimer, I'm going to be referencing some heavy topics in a very unserious manner. So there's your warning. If you're familiar with Love Me Not, then you already know what you're going to be getting into. All right, let's get into me being Min Jiwook's biggest hater. When I originally started reading Love Me Not, it was on a now defunct site where it's called Even If You Don't Love Me, which honestly I like better than the localized name. I was excited with each release. It seemed like it was going to be another typical toxic romance, and I mean that in a good way. But then, as I saw more and more of Min Jiwook's personality, it slowly started to dawn on me. Victim blaming was created with this man in mind. I got really far in the story reading the unofficial version till it got to a point where I couldn't deal with it with Jiwook anymore. And we'll get into Sungun, the top, in a minute. Don't you worry. So I dropped it around like chapter 80 something. Sunk cost fallacy wasn't going to get me this time. But then it showed up on Lezen, and it was enough time later that I thought, you know what, I'll give it another shot. There's some parts that were badly translated later on. Maybe it'll feel different this time. No. Min Jiwook was the same, and I'm going to talk about it. So I'm not going to go into super detail about the plot because this is a video for people who have finished Love Me Not, or at least gotten really far, because I don't really talk a whole lot about the very end. I kind of do, but it's not super important to this main point that I'm trying to hammer out. I will not be skating around spoilers because they are integral to the argument. So here's your spoiler warning. So Min Jiwook is our plucky little bottom protagonist, and he's poor and had to previously drop out of high school. He manages to get a scholarship to this prestigious high school for rich kids in the hopes that he can become a lawyer and make lots of money. He has 99 problems, and he hopes as a lawyer he can resolve all of them with money. As a poor, and also older than his fellow classmates, he's a bit of an outcast. I don't recall them specifically saying his age, but he is of legal age to drink, which is 19 in South Korea. Hyun Ju's Sungun, the top of the story, the beautiful, moody terror from the JS group, some super important, super rich conglomerate, the lead of the elite. He's immediately drawn to Jiwook, and they have their toxic romance, whatever. So I have to commend Pando, the author, for making both MCs somewhat unlikable, with Jiwook being especially so, if you're starting from the opinion of liking toxic tops. It was to the point that I started rooting for the top, despite him also being a piece of shit, simply because I can't even blame him for turning out how he did, due to Jiwook's actions. My biggest and main problem with Jiwook is his pride. His pride, which leads to an inferiority complex. Instead of accepting the handouts that Sungun readily provided, he refused them or insisted on paying him back with his meager funds. His pride made him an extremely unlikable victim, and you don't want an unlikable victim in fiction. That's no good. Especially the way these BL manhwa are set up with having the bottoms go through the absolute worst shit. The victims need all the sympathy they can get. His decisions were dumb, and they hurt not only himself, but the one person who could have pulled him out of everything. If he had just accepted the offer to pay off his debts, then he would have been set with high school and college. With the backing of his rich boyfriend, he could have been supported through law school, become a lawyer, and been self-sufficient and pay him back, since that was so important to him. But no, Jiwook chose to lie to Sungun, ghost him, and then continue working low-wage jobs that abused him and kept him in proximity to people who abused him. It's obviously not his fault he was raped multiple times during the story. I won't blame him for that. But I do blame him for making the decisions that made him end up vulnerable enough for that to happen when he had the choice to get a free ride to a better life. He said, no, I'm gonna do it my way, and as a result was subjected to some of the worst things a human can go through by the dredges of humanity. How am I, as the reader, supposed to sympathize with this moron when the answer was so clear which decision he should have made? How am I supposed to feel sorry for him when those awful things happened to him almost as a direct consequence of him abandoning his boyfriend, at the height of things going well for them, mind you, and when he could have used his rich boyfriend's help the most? It would be different if either decision would be reasonably considered to have around the same weight of bad consequences for Jiwook, but no, I don't think so. I don't think being gang raped and living in abject poverty would have been things he'd be subjected to if he had accepted Sungun's offer. Would he have been under constant pressure to hide his relationship because of societal homophobia? Yeah. This is a BL manhwa after all. That is in no way comparable to what he actually went through. I want to go over a few events early on in the story that contributed to me becoming a Jiwook hater. The lunch incident. Early on, Sungun buys him lunch from the cafeteria and more or less forces him to eat with him and his henchman Junyoung. Because Jiwook hasn't paid the cafeteria fees, he feels uncomfortable taking the meal. Sungun insists that he eats because he paid for it. For whatever reason, this bitch gets pissed off that he got a free meal. He tries to leave after eating a few bites, and Sungun's toxic trash ass tosses the tray on the floor, orders his henchman to get another, and says he'll continue to do this until Jiwook eats. Is this manipulative? Fucking obviously. That doesn't need to be stated. But you know what could have happened that would have been a win-win for everyone involved? If Jiwook just fucking ate the free food. What was the cost of this meal? Negligible. He was hungry anyway. And so he gives in. He presumably finishes the meal because the next scene is him throwing it up in the bathroom. Like, clearly he was stressed and upset because of Sungun's actions. I'm not knocking him for that. Sungun is an asshole here. But why did Jiwook make such a big deal out of taking this one stupid free school cafeteria meal? Does this not seem like a huge overreaction? You know what would have been less stressful? If he just ate the goddamn free meal. Like, at this point, there is no indication that Sungun was doing this conditionally. He had been nice to him up to this point. These aren't the types of actions that makes me think, yeah, he's fighting against his oppressor. These are the actions of someone who doesn't know how to manipulate the situation to their benefit. Oh, rich guy is doting on me? Yeah, I'll eat your free meal. Jiwook's like, he's bored and wants to torment me. By buying you food? Oh yeah, he's really bullying you. And I'm not saying this couldn't escalate further. I've read other stories where they'll pretend to be friends and then sucker punch him with something horrible and be like, haha, I've actually hated you this whole time. But let's check Sungun's track record at this point. He gave Jiwook a reference book he was missing during class, gave him a bunch of textbooks he didn't need that Jiwook didn't have, accepted Jiwook's annoying offer to pay for lunch for him and ate at a cheap restaurant that gave him heartburn, got mad when Jiwook was talking to that absolute psycho, but then apologized to him for his outburst, drove him home on his bike, accepted Jiwook's refusal to invite him inside his home, so he does, kind of understand consent, and now he's buying him a free lunch. Yeah, he's definitely bullying you. Next incident, icing out Sungun when he asks him to go on a trip. Sungun talks about inviting Jiwook on a trip for his birthday. Instead of putting aside his pride and joining him for his birthday, he makes it about himself and his insecurities about being unable to buy him a gift. Boy, you are the gift. You can literally see how crushed Sungun is at his not even refusal. He just fucking says he's gonna go home in the middle of Sungun excitedly telling him his plans. Sunggun even backtracks and changes the plans to accommodate Jiwook's hesitation. What does Jiwook do? Doubles down and completely ices him out. The infamous breakup scene in chapter 38. You know I had to address it. The worst thing he does to Sunggun, which has major ripple effects on Sunggun's future that Jiwook will never even know. Jiwook's father dies, and at the funeral, some loan sharks show up with a fraudulent loan claiming he's a co-signer, and they take his phone and all the donation money and give him their own burner phone that he is only able to contact them with. Sunggun is worried sick because he hasn't heard from him all day and had been calling him with no answer, so he's waiting outside Jiwook's apartment when Jiwook arrives home. Yada yada. I'm not going to go into all the details, just the important parts, but Jiwook tells him they should break up. He lies to him about if Sunggun gets him the money for the debt, which he discreetly doesn't tell him that it is for a debt. Makes fun of him for not having any power in JS when he is unable to immediately get the money from his sister, and then skips town after Sunggun leaves and promises he'll get him the money. The worst part is Sunggun does get the money, and at the expense of selling his soul to his sister in JS, something he didn't want and had little hope for as the bastard child of the family. I know Sunggun tries to use sympathy to manipulate him to stay, but none of it isn't the truth, and it's absolutely heartbreaking because Sunggun's feelings are real, and you can see him dying inside. He may have said this after trauma dumping on Jiwook, but it's genuinely how he feels. And even after the time skip way later on and he acts out his revenge, you can see the excitement when Jiwook pretends to go along with going to the US. His feelings were always genuine. Jiwook is in the worst trouble of his life that would literally be resolved with money, but when his cash cow boyfriend comes around, he says everything he can to hurt his feelings and pushes him away. He claimed to be happy he didn't get in Sunggun's way, but honey, my sweet summer child, Sunggun was doing just fine. His grades didn't slip, and his sister knew about him but didn't do anything about it. She even knew the money was for him. We finally get to that club scene and the culmination of everything up to this point, even though this is a horrible scene we witness. We even see him reliving his trauma from a similar incident at one of his previous shitty jobs. I don't feel as sorry for him as we obviously are meant to. In comparison to what Nakyum from Painter of the Night similarly goes through, in his case, he is so much more likable that everything he goes through truly pains me. From the start all the way to the end, I wanted the world for him. We've gotten to this point where we should be highly sympathetic of Jiwook because all of the trauma has caught up to him and he's finally feeling its effects. But instead of feeling sympathetic, I feel like, hey, you put yourself in this position. Now you're dealing with the consequences of your actions. You created a lot of the situations that got you to this point, and now you're feeling the repercussions. And that's seriously not how the reader should be feeling about the tragic main character that is a victim. Jiwook had the makings of the perfect victim. He's cute and sweet, he has a tragic life, he is a good person. He's going through life the proper way instead of stealing, scamming, and lying. But because he had all that ugly pride and inferiority complex, it made it hard to want to sympathize with him. The moment he finally lets go of his stupid pride and is honest with Sunggun, he's instantly likable. It almost makes me want to rethink all the bad things I thought about him. Once he's let go of his pride and is going through therapy, when Sunggun hits him with the, well, you gonna pay me back now, when Jiwook attempts to take control of his life again, watching him crumble actually made me feel for him this time. Also, can we talk about how tired the making the woman from the rich family that the top is being forced to marry the villain trope is? Heejin, like seriously, fuck this bitch. Half the time when they do this trope, she doesn't even like him, which makes her persistence frustrating. And then there's where she's in love with him, quote unquote, but she does crazy shit that would ultimately make him hate her more than he already does because she's being forced on him. And it kind of sucks when Jiwook finds out about the engagement. Despite knowing what Sunggun did and once again the sacrifices he was having to make as a chaebol, the words he uses are playing out exactly like the cheating, down-low, bi boyfriend that you normally see. I don't blame Jiwook for not trusting him, but the scene is frustrating because we know Sunggun's intentions and that he did this truly to protect Jiwook. The only reason you're kind of on Sunggun's side is because you know everything he's doing. Unlike with most stories that only follow the bottom, this story is showing what both the top and bottom are going through, so the reader doesn't have to wait for the big reveal to know, oh, he's been working towards a better future for them both this whole time. You know what would have made this whole thing easier? If Jiwook was a likable protagonist. Characters can almost do no wrong if they are likable, in my opinion. I would define likable as including some or all of these factors. The reader can relate to them on some factor. If they are toxic despite being so, they have enough charisma to overshadow it, such as bad boys or gangsters. They have a great personality. they're hot. Like, let's not forget how the public has propped up awful people simply because they deemed them bangable. I have mentally defended so many terrible characters all because they were likable, and I will continue to do so. It's all fake anyway. It is a weird writing decision to write a main character that you are forced to see often because they have loads of screen time as unlikable. They're a pervert, an asshole in a non-charismatic way. They're a menace to society, once again in a non-charismatic way. What benefit is there to anyone, the reader or the author, to write a main character that nobody likes? It sometimes feels like it's a self-insert and the author is subconsciously, or consciously, writing themselves or possibly someone close to them or that made an impact, good or bad, on their life. We've all seen some version of the image showing all the generic, basic-ass, typical harem protagonists. This is obviously a way to have a generic character be a placeholder for the watcher/reader. Harems obviously have a target demographic of young men. They're likable only in the sense that they are relatable to the type of men that would see themselves in him and have perceived riz because tons of beautiful women love them. This is fantasy. Unless he had money or had an actual incredibly appealing personality, beautiful women do not flock to generic dudes. Not to say a beautiful woman would never find a generic dude attractive, but to be a beautiful woman magnet is a fantasy. Harem protag tangent aside, if you're going to write a story where tons of traumatic, awful things happen to a main character, I think the most important factor you have to remember is to make that victim likable. It is all too easy, as we have seen in the case of Tana Mongeau and Cody Ko in real life, for example, that if the victim isn't likable, isn't perfect, then it's easy to blame them, easy to think they deserved what happened to them. And that's real life, where there are actual victims, actual damages, and picking sides is siding with someone who committed an actual crime, or an admittedly unlikable but actual victim. In the case of Jiwook, he is at the mercy of how the author decided to depict him. So he had the potential to be a perfect victim, but they chose to make him not only imperfect, but not likable to empathize with his imperfection. And to be clear, him being poor has nothing to do with his likability. If anything, if he had a likable personality, his dire situation would have endeared me to him that much more. But I won't say him being poor didn't contribute to his personality. Jiwook has this enormous amount of pride that prevented him from accepting help from others. This seems like a common theme in Asian culture in general of having some sort of aversion to accepting help from someone more fortunate and insisting on reciprocating in any meager, in comparison to a literal rich overlord, way. Jiwook was like the personification of that attitude. I remember when I was reading this for the first time and bitching to my friend about how he was unnecessarily prideful, that it made it hard to not only sympathize with him, but to like him at all. At times, it made me actively wish his pride would get him into bad situations, just so he could see how stupid it was, and perhaps change his tune. Which is exactly what happened, so I guess I got my wish. At times, I find myself rooting for the top, Sungun, to a slight extent, because I understood his thirst for revenge. I'm not 100% on board with it, but following an Avenger whose revenge you think is justified is always satisfying. Bottom line is, in my opinion, the sole purpose of a fictional story is to be enjoyed. Even if that story is full of angst, trauma, sad, depressing things, there are people who like reading intense stuff like that. They enjoy having their emotions raked over the burning hot coals. Even if there is nothing but doom and gloom in a story, there has to be something the reader latches onto as a positive. If it's not the setting, then it's the characters, either relating or simply empathizing with them. It is wholly unfulfilling to have an angst setting and then every main character is a giant pile of dog shit. If I wanted this kind of story, then I would just watch videos and celebrity gossip all day. In the end, of course, in typical toxic BL fashion, everything ended up working out well. I actually like that the story had the characters getting justice with their own hands outside of the law. Nothing I hate more than the antagonist doing something absolutely foul, getting off lightly for it, and then getting their own side story where they redeem themselves and get their own pairing. The only example of that I liked was Cho-won from Love is an Illusion. He actually did redeem himself. I also probably like him because he's a tsundere. Anyway, I'm done yapping about this. I didn't hate the story overall, but having characters that are difficult to love definitely made this a difficult read. What are your thoughts? Let me know down below. Okay, thanks, bye!